It's The Big Show with Alex Belfield back here at Showbiz Towers at Max Clifford Associates, which is the big building in London where everything seems to happen. It's been a busy old time for you recently, hasn't it?
It normally is busy, Alex, but it's been particularly busy at the moment. You know, we're in the middle of the normal media frenzy that goes on surrounding just about anyone and everyone we're involved with. A lot of what you do is management, managing careers and trying to keep your clients, whether they're stars or they're banks or they're property companies or health and beauty or all the wide range of clients that we have, on top. But obviously, image is basically what we're at the heart of, and creating the right image, fortunately for us, seems to be more and more important to anyone out there all the time. And of course, when I started out, it was all about promotion. In the last decade, it's more and more about protection.
And how have you managed to make it to the top? I mean, you're so synonymous with PR. You're the king of it in London, in the UK. You've got everybody on your books from Simon Cowell, as you say, to Jade Goody. Why do you think you've made it and others aren't as successful?
You know, I can't speak for other people, Alex, but I think a lot of it, I've been very lucky. Right time, right place. You know, I started out in the early 60s as a young press officer in the EMI press office, given an unknown band to help launch called the Beatles. You don't get much luckier than that. We were launching Cliff and Adam Faith at the time, and then a few years later we launched a record label called Tamla Motown, which did quite well with Michael Jackson and the Four Tops and Diana Ross and Stevie Wonder. So a lot of it was very, very lucky. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. So as the public relations industry kind of grew up in this country, because when I started we were press officers, no one had heard the term. So when it did really get going and get established in the 70s and 80s, I was kind of at the heart of it from the start. So good fortune, good timing, really.
And it's interesting how the business has changed. You mentioned you started with the Beatles, which were the biggest of them all. How does that differ then in the old days to today managing someone?
Well, I think that with Simon's a very good example. I mean, he's huge in America, known worldwide because obviously his shows are hits worldwide. Pop Idol and then X Factor, American Idol, America's Got Talent, Britain's Got Talent. Just about everything he's touched in the last 7-8 years has turned to not just gold but platinum. The difference is that the biggest part of the work I do with Simon is protection rather than promotion. For every 100 interview requests we maybe do one. But there's all kinds of Simon's meant to have done this, Simon's meant to have done that, and we're stopping these things because one, they're untrue, two, they would be damaging. So that Simon in many ways is a good example of the huge change that I've experienced, in the last 40 years, but particularly in the last 10-20 years. The biggest part of what we're doing with major stars, whether they're people like Simon Cowell or they're a bank or a private jet company or any of the wide variety of clients we look after in entertainment and business, is protection. With the Lawn Tennis Association, the Tennis Foundation, it's about making people realise, tennis is for everybody. It's one of the few games that men and women can play together. It's a very social game, it's great for your health. Also, there's lots of areas around the country where they've had all kinds of problems with youngsters, where tennis courts have been turned into the kind of centre for activity for them, and it's been very beneficial to the community. So there's a wide range of areas that we're involved in, and I suppose that's why it's always so interesting.
And it is manipulation in a way, isn't it? Because you've got a message you want to get out there, and your job is to try and get the media to follow that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a game of chess. In its simplest form, the media want to have as much control over the media as possible. Stars, businesses, everybody wants to have as much control as possible, and we're the means of hopefully achieving that wherever we can. But the fact is that, of course, you're in competition, you're working together with a newspaper today, but tomorrow you're trying to stop something that they desperately want to come out with. So it's ever changing, the role, and it's never boring.
Is it almost a barter system? If I come to you and I'm the editor of a newspaper, I've got something juicy, you don't want it to go in, you have to offer me something better to keep it out?
Well, that's true, that's a small part of it. But of course, the fact of the matter is that anticipation is the best form of protection. If I know a client, whether he's the chairman of a big company, a building company, or property company or a star is up to something which is going to cause problems for him in terms of the media, I will do everything I can to make sure that no one ever finds out about it. And I've got clients I've been working with for 20, 30 years that we've done that with. And many managers that come to me and say, Max, you know what you did with such and such 10 years ago? Well, he's coming in, she's coming in, they're going to be in the country filming for 3 months. Will you look after them and make sure that their excesses don't get publicised? So again, there's a lot more to it than bartering, but obviously anticipation is a very important part of what we do.
We heard your mobile ringing there. That could be anybody. Are you always surprised who can ring you next? When you see one of those anonymous numbers, it literally could be anybody in the world, could it?
Yes. I mean, it goes from the sublime to the ridiculous, but literally people do phone me, and people phone me and say, look, Max, you've never met me before, but if you can't help me, my business is going to be destroyed, or my marriage, or my life, or whatever. Because I suppose of people do know you, and they maybe know from a friend what you've done for them or what you've done for somebody else. So again, you do get the most amazing phone calls from all over the world and from all kinds of interesting people in all kinds of amazing situations.
When we've spoken before, I've asked you about the difference between the really serious stuff and the nonsense, and there is kind of a thin line between that, because through your business you have destroyed people because you out people for whatever that may be. At the same time, you create legendary stories. I noticed just up there, Freddie Starr Ate My Hamster was one of your stories that was front page of the Sun that sticks with him today. The question I always love to ask you is your conscience. Where is the line drawn between getting the truth out there, ruining somebody, or actually just keeping your mouth shut?
Again, it's down to you. It's your judgment, isn't it? We all make our own judgments in what we do. I was quite happy to tell the world about Gary Glitter. I was quite happy to let the world know about Jonathan King. I was quite happy to let people know what Jeffrey Archer was up to, because I thought that was important, and I thought we should know. There's been plenty of people that I've protected. Maybe it's a politician that's been having an affair, but this politician I know extremely well, and he or she hasn't been preaching family values, hasn't been using their family to create a false image. So in my view then, you look at the situation, you think, well, they're doing a very good job. They're doing, whether I agree with their politics or not, so I don't want to see that destroyed because of something which will make a good story. That's my judgment. A lot of people will disagree, but my attitude is you make up your own mind, basically based on what you see. I never had any problems with John Major having an affair or David Mellor having an affair. It's when they started preaching us about family values and back to basics, the hypocrisy of it all, that I thought, well, okay, well then fine. That they deserve to be shown up for what they really are.
And is there ever a conflict of interest between the worth of the story to the press and the money that you would get to keep it quiet? Because there's sometimes an imbalance, isn't there?
No, it's. I mean, that again, there's an awful lot of things that I keep out that if I had broken, I would have made a fortune from. But in my view, it wasn't right. So, in terms of money isn't a very important part of life, of course. But there's a lot of other things that are very important as well. I was asked to take on PR for Nigeria years ago. Own price, £750,000, £1 million, and this is a long time ago. But because I knew what was going on over there was no way I would get involved. A lot of other PR people did get involved. So I'm quite happy to stand up and be counted. Why have you done this? Happy to stand up. With a lot of the people that I've broken stories, I'll go face to face with them on television anytime. They don't.
And then we look at people like Shilpa Shetty and the Jade Goodies you mentioned earlier. What you're very clever at is turning a negative into a positive, turning someone like Jade, who became a big star, was very popular, became very unpopular, and making her popular again. I know she's had illness recently, which is a different thing. Yeah. How easy is that then to construct a negative into a positive?
Well, in that case, it wasn't difficult. One, because I knew Jade well enough to know that she wasn't racist. Two, because I know and believe that she was totally set up on that programme. Three, because Shilpa Shetty herself said, Max, she's not racist, as did Jermaine Jackson to me. So when Jade came to me just a few months ago, and obviously her career rock bottom and everything going wrong, I was quite happy to say, yeah, I represent you, because, you know, I was only going to get the message across which I knew to be true, and fortunately it's worked extremely well.
And does it ever work the other way, where you put the call into somebody and say, look, you're going completely down the wrong path, I can help you?
No, I never look for business. I've never pitched for business. Many times I've phoned people because I liked them and said, look, you're making a big mistake. You know, if I was you, I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do that program, I wouldn't do that interview. You know, you're not going to get anything like you want from, I know this journalist, I know that program, they'll stitch you up, leave it alone. But that's purely because I'm in the middle of this game, and if you care about people, as I do, and you know what's going to happen, then I'm happy to do it. And that's not a financial call, that's just a judgment call.
And then in 2008, with video cameras and texting and mobiles, how difficult is it now to keep that out of the limelight?
Very difficult, because we have an ever-intrusive press. Although, having said that, of course, you know, more and more we've got a privacy law in all but name. So there is greater and greater protection. But of course, that only applies to generally the rich and the famous, who can afford expensive lawyers and expensive PR people like me to look after them. Ordinary members of the public still don't get looked after, and until there's legal aid for libel, that won't change. They can't afford to fight back when maybe they're being attacked or even destroyed, ordinary members of the public, by a story that might have no truth in it at all. A good example of that would have been Robert Murat, who came to me for help when he was being assassinated by the British media, once he was given that Arguido status in Portugal. And the kind of articles I was reading about him were horrendous, with absolutely no substance at all. All sensation, no substance. I helped him, I advised him, free of charge, and that led to him getting something nearly £750,000 in compensation, and stopped all of the British media from destroying him unjustly. You know, those are the kind of things I like to do. I wasn't paid for it.
Did you ever consider that if you were wrong, it would have been the worst PR story for you ever?
But I knew I wasn't wrong, because...
You weren't there, so you didn't 100% know.
Well, I did know, because I spoke to the people involved. And I spoke to the journalists. How did you get that information? Where did it come from? I found out. You know, a good example, big story, Robert Murat's had his computer seized. They found child pornography on it. Spoke to the police, because I knew people over there. No, we haven't seized his computer. No, when we did check it, no images of child pornography at all. That's how I do what I do. Get to the truth, get to find out exactly what's gone on, and then you work from there.
Are the tabloids a law unto themselves, where they literally can print anything and say anything, and it's only down to whether they know that you've got enough money to sue them that would make them think twice about printing it?
I think, obviously, there's an increasingly savage circulation battle. I think, you know, the British press gets more and more destructive all the time. Bad news is news, good news isn't, particularly on the tabloids. And often it is sensation over substance. The best chance you've got, yes, is if you've got someone, one, that understands and knows the way the business works. Two, you've got the money or the power to stand up for yourself, and that they're worried that, you know, if we do this, it might cost us a lot of money. I mean, Max Mosley was a good example of what happened with the News of the World. They never dreamt that he would want to stand up and talk about this and take them on. So, you know, all the Nazi stuff, which was shown to be totally untrue and which was incredibly damaging to him, was shown up because he stood up for himself. They naturally assumed, because of previous experience, well, he's going to be too embarrassed to do that. So they took a chance, and it cost him a lot of money.
Very finally, I want to talk about Kerry Katona. I was with her for an hour last year and did a special. I found it concerning. I asked her to her face, are you okay? She insisted she was. How do you feel? You know better than I do.
Well, I've been very close to Kerry for the last 5 years, and you know, I know about her childhood, about the foster parents, about her mother, who's a self-admitted drug addict, introduced Kerry to drugs at a very young age, etc. All she's been through. The heartache of the breakup of her marriage with Brian, the fact that she took briefly to drugs then, drinking, the bipolar she suffered from, the depression which she still suffers from, all of the dramas, including, you know, recently the bankruptcy. She's a very, very sensitive person who's had a real mountain to climb. I've got a lot of time for her, you know, and we've been very close. I worry for her from time to time, because she's got a very addictive personality, and she should be having regular advice, counselling, treatment, particularly for depression and bipolar, etc. And I'm hoping that, you know, the older she gets, that the better she will get. But she's a fragile person and someone who I worry, constantly worry about. You know, in October, when the This Morning interview went out, I think a lot of people really have, since then, have been increasingly concerned for her health and her happiness. I certainly am.
And should she have done it? Should she be in the public eye at this stage, making MTV documentaries?
Well, the problem is that this is what Kerry wants to do. Obviously, because of her financial situation, she needs to do. Sometimes the answer to that is yes, Alex. Sometimes the answer to that is no, because with Kerry it can change from one day, even a few hours. That's the nature of the person. So it's very difficult to give a yes or no answer to that. You know, she is a natural exhibitionist, she's a natural comedy actress as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, I've worked very hard and closely with Kerry over the last 5 years to try and keep her online, and also to protect her from the excesses of herself and those around her. And most of the time I think it's got better, but then sometimes things happen, and because of the nature of the beast, and she is and suffers from bipolar, you know, from depression, she suddenly goes back down again. So it's an ever-changing situation, and she's always going to need protection. We've tried to provide that as much as possible over the last few years, although in more recent time it's got increasingly difficult.
And you can understand why people were concerned with the This Morning interview. There was something odd.
I totally understand. People phone me, you know, fans of hers, her sponsors, lots of people, genuinely concerned, because they generally are very fond of Kerry, worried about what they saw and what they heard. You know, Kerry, Mark say it's purely down to medication. But the problem is, what's the public perception? Well, the public perception, as you and I both know, is very different from that. And that's what I have to deal with, because that's what the sponsors are concerned about. You know, Iceland, MTV themselves, who set up the interview. If I'd have been with her, if I'd have been involved with this interview, no way would I have allowed it to have taken place, because she was clearly slurring her words. And whether it was down to medication, which is what they claim, you know that that's not how it's going to be perceived. So, you know, it's a question of that, you know, again, anticipate a problem and take care of it. Prevention is better than cure in that case.
So it shouldn't have happened. Somebody should have stepped in and said, today's not the right day to do this.
Absolutely right. You know, Mark was with her, someone from MTV, they should have said there's no way she can go on. We know it's down to medication, but she's slurring her words. People will put more into it and see more into it, and that's exactly what's happened. And that was very damaging and also very worrying.
And she is in that bracket where we do seem to care as people. When I opened my interview with her last year and I said, we love you, and I think we genuinely do. We do care about her. But then you see something like that and you start wondering, it's just something that, you're right, should probably never have taken place.
No, there's always an element of self-destructiveness about Kerry, and always have been, which is, you know, it's a fact of life with a lot of people. But she goes from on top of the world to the bottom, you know, the bottom of the ocean in no time at all. And, you know, that is down in no small way to her bipolar. And I think, you know, the past and the insecurities, you know, her mum, her upbringing, father, you know, nowhere to be seen, foster parents, all kinds of tragic things going on, which is written about and referred to many times. You know, totally in love with Brian McFadden, and he let her down. So you can understand. You know, I've got a lot of time for Kerry, and I sincerely hope that she will, you know, get on top, and that things will get back to where we all want them to be for her.
I presume the idea of the interview on This Morning was to show her physically in shape, and then all you needed her to come across was mentally in shape, and everybody thought she was back on form.
I mean, the whole point of the MTV show was called Whole Again. It was meant to show Kerry healthy, happy, looking good, you know, having a great time. She looked good in terms of, you know, the papers, the pictures, the OK magazine, all of those. Obviously, from a physical point of view, she's, you know, lost a lot of weight and looking great. But in terms of how she was, facially, but also vocally, that's worried an awful lot of people. And you know, I can understand. A girl in my office, or one of the girls in my office that watched the interview, was crying because she's worked very closely with Kerry, thinks the world of her, and knew, you know, how it came across.
Is there anybody giving her any psychological help?
Mark.
Is he the man to do it?
Well, that remains to be seen. He's the closest person to her. She's madly in love with him. Personally, I would like her to get back and have the regular medical advice and support that she was having previously to the birth of little Max.
Max, it's great to talk to you. It's always nice to see you. A million stories. We could talk forever because you're one of those people that, well, you know everything. And it's the stories you won't tell us that we want to know that's even more fascinating than the ones that you will. Congratulations on being you. You've built an empire, and it is so interesting how the media works. And I think for people like me who know little about it, to get an insight into your life is fascinating. Thanks for talking to me.
No, it's a pleasure, Alex, and happy Christmas to everybody.